I was ankle-deep in dry leaves, wrench in hand, when the septic truck driver called me. "Hey Nate," he said, "I can't get through the gate. Some lady in a golf cart flagged me and said I'm not authorized to enter." I wiped sweat off my forehead and muttered, "Let me guess." Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, attitude like she owns the sun. "Yeah," he chuckled. "Said her name was Sharon or something." I groaned. "That's Sharon Jennings, head of the HOA, just hang tight. I live in a semi-rural development just outside Fort Worth. 1,200 homes, all on septic systems. I own the only licensed septic service company within 20 miles. Golden Gutters Septic. Been running it for 17 years. Even have a long-term contract with the HOA to service the entire community. But Sharon got elected HOA president 3 months ago, and she's been on a power trip ever since. I hopped in my truck and rolled up to the front gate. Sure enough, there she was, Sharon Jennings, glaring at the septic truck like it had personally insulted her. I stepped out. "Sharon." "What the hell is going on?" She crossed her arms. "This vehicle isn't on the approved vendor list. I've been servicing this neighborhood for over a decade. I literally have a contract with the HOA." She tilted her head. "Well, that's under review." "Under review by who?" "You." "You don't have the authority to void a contract." Sharon didn't flinch. "Until the board decides, no unauthorized vehicles are allowed in. Safety protocols." I looked at the driver, who was now just sitting behind the wheel, bewildered. "You realize the Dobsons are backed up, right?" "They've got raw sewage in their backyard." Sharon shrugged. "Not my problem." I clenched my jaw. "All right, you want to play games? Let's play." I turned to the driver. "Go home, I'll handle it." Then I drove straight to my office, opened my laptop, and pulled up the HOA service agreement. Sure enough, Section 9. Termination of contract requires 30 days written notice and must be approved by a 2/3 board vote. Not only had I not received a notice, but I also knew for a fact 2 board members had no clue what Sharon was doing. I made 3 calls. First was to my lawyer. Second was to the city's health department. The third was to my dispatcher. "Pull all trucks from the Oak Hollow development," I told her. "Effective immediately, no service until further notice." She hesitated. "Even for emergencies, especially emergencies." By the next afternoon, I had 27 voicemails, blocked toilets, rising tanks, furious homeowners, and that was before the weekend even hit. I knew exactly how long it would take before things got messy. It was going to be beautiful. By Sunday morning, the neighborhood message boards were on fire. Complaints flooded in from every corner of Oak Hollow. People were demanding answers, asking why their toilets wouldn't flush, and warning others not to use their dishwashers unless they wanted surprises in the basement. And just like I predicted, Sharon wasn't answering anyone. I wasn't sitting idle either. I'd spent Saturday afternoon reviewing the HOA's public records filings. Thanks to a friend on the local zoning commission, I got access to their latest infrastructure maintenance reports. What I found was revealing. Turns out Sharon had quietly diverted $10,000 from the sanitation line item into beautification projects. That explained the sudden burst of rose bushes along the main road and those ridiculous iron benches no one used. She robbed the emergency pump fund to plant flowers. Monday morning, I walked into the city's environmental health division with a printed report and a thumb drive full of footage. My trucks are all equipped with dash cams, and one caught Sharon physically blocking the septic truck at the main gate. That, combined with the service contract and the HOA's financial mismanagement, was enough to make the compliance officer sit up straight. The moment raw sewage breaks containment onto public or neighboring property, we're talking Class C infraction, he said, tapping his pen. And if they diverted designated sanitation funds, that's misappropriation. Could escalate to civil fraud, I nodded. You'll want to act fast. Residents are already seeing backyard ponds forming, none of them natural. He didn't even hesitate. We'll send investigators by noon. I left the office and headed to a diner on the edge of town. That's where I met with Doug and Patris, two members of the HOA board who'd been locked out of decision-making ever since Sharon staged a vote while half the board was at a funeral. Doug stirred his coffee, glancing around like Sharon might materialize from the coat rack. She said it was an emergency vote, something about vendor non-compliance. Patris shook her head. She used that as a smokescreen. There was no emergency. She wanted to replace you with her brother-in-law's landscaping company. He doesn't even have a septic license. I leaned back. So she's turning sewer maintenance over to a guy who trims hedges and mows lawns. Worse, Patris said. He was cited last year for illegal dumping outside city limits. She's trying to push it through quietly, but without a full board vote, it's not legitimate. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Here's your leverage. Contract terms, video evidence, and a ledger showing the fund reallocation. I've already sent copies to the county health department and the city attorney's office, but if you two want to call an emergency board meeting, now's your chance. Doug looked at the documents, his jaw tightening. I think we've let her run unchecked too long. Then don't wait, I said. Because I promise you, the first kid who steps in sewage runoff is going to generate a lawsuit none of us wants. They didn't need more convincing. By that evening, they'd contacted the remaining board members and scheduled a public emergency session for Wednesday night at the community center. Flyers went up. Everyone was invited. Meanwhile, things in Oak Hollow were going downhill fast. I got a call Tuesday morning from a retired Army couple whose tank had overflowed into their vegetable garden. Another family had to evacuate after their basement sump pump failed and the overflow started backing into their laundry room. I documented everything with timestamps and affidavits. If Sharon thought she could ride this out, she was about to get a reality check. Wednesday night, the community center was packed. I stayed near the back, arms crossed, as Sharon took the stage like she was hosting a charity gala. I know there have been some challenges, she began, her voice syrupy. But we're working diligently to resolve the vendor transition, and Doug stood up. There was no board vote to terminate our sanitation contract. She blinked, caught off guard. Well, the president is authorized to make emergency decisions, not without written notice and confirmation of an actual emergency. Patris cut in. You staged a vote with half the board absent and you diverted funds without approval. People in the crowd started murmuring. Furthermore, Doug continued, holding up a printout, you attempted to replace a licensed septic service with your brother-in-law's landscaping business, who, by the way, has no legal authority to handle wastewater. Sharon's voice wavered. That's a gross misrepresentation. He's in the process of applying for credentials. Someone near the front stood up. Is that why my yard smells like a chemical plant? Because some lawn guy is learning on the job, another voice called out. My mother's on dialysis. She's staying with us until her house is cleaned out. We can't even flush a toilet. It spiraled from there. Residents stood up one after another, airing grievances, listing damages, demanding to know why their dues were being spent on flowers instead of functioning plumbing. By the time the city health inspector arrived with 2 officers in tow, the room had reached a boiling point. He stepped up beside the board members and calmly introduced himself. We've received multiple complaints and have confirmed at least 15 active code violations, including 2 properties with cross-contamination between graywater and potable lines. People gasped. We are issuing a formal cease and desist on all unauthorized waste management operations within this community until further notice. Additionally, we are launching an inquiry into potential misappropriation of HOA funds. Mrs. Jennings, we'll need you to come with us to answer some questions. Sharon looked around for support, but no one moved. Even her usual lackeys were silent. Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, one of the officers gently took her by the arm and they walked her out. The room was dead quiet for a few seconds. Then an older man near the back said, "So, does this mean we can get our toilets working again?" Everyone turned to look at me. I raised an eyebrow. Depends. You ready to stop planting rose bushes with sewage money? Laughter broke out. People clapped. And just like that, the board voted unanimously to reinstate our contract, effective immediately. I agreed to have trucks out the next morning under the condition that the HOA set up a transparent maintenance fund overseen by a newly elected subcommittee of actual residents. Doug nodded. You'll have full cooperation, and this time we'll do it by the book. As people filed out relieved, I stood by the door and shook hands with a few of them. No one talked about Sharon. They were too busy planning repairs, sharing bleach tips, and swapping horror stories about what they'd been through. It wasn't just about sewage anymore. It was about taking back control from someone who thought she could rule from a golf cart and a clipboard. And if I had to shut down 1,200 homes to make that happen, worth it. The next morning, I was already out with the crew by sunrise. Not because I'd trained my team to handle emergencies blindfolded, but because I needed to see the damage for myself. After weeks of obstruction and neglect, Oak Hollow looked like a disaster zone in khakis. Overflow tanks, leach fields gone sour, entire cul-de-sacs reeking like forgotten landfills. This wasn't just negligence. It was sabotage by bureaucracy. As we cleared the first cluster of homes, my foreman Ray walked over, his boots caked in sludge. Found something odd behind lot 73, he said. You're gonna want to see it. I followed him to the edge of a property that backed up to the woods. What I saw made my stomach dip. A trench about 30 feet long cut through the brush, lined with PVC pipe that vanished beneath the undergrowth. The end of it wasn't capped or sealed. It was open. And judging by the discoloration and smell, raw sewage had been funneled straight into the woods. Someone rigged a bypass, Ray muttered. Diverted waste off property to avoid tank overflow? Illegally, I added. And if this ties back to who I think it does, we're not just talking about HOA mismanagement anymore. This is environmental dumping. I snapped photos, took a water sample, and marked the GPS coordinates. Then I made a call to the County Environmental Enforcement Office. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the temporary HOA office formerly the old maintenance shed, now converted into a makeshift headquarters. Doug and Patris were inside, going through a stack of binders and receipts. Doug didn't look up. We're still trying to untangle where all the money went. Sharon wasn't just moving funds around, she was inventing vendors. Patris slid a file across the table. Check this out. North Star Waste Solutions, invoice after invoice for septic inspections. Except we called the number listed it goes to a disconnected line. I scanned the paperwork. These were submitted during the months my company was blocked. She was falsifying inspections to cover the breakdown. Doug rubbed his temple, and approving them herself. No oversight, no third-party verification. She was laundering HOA money through a shell vendor, I said. And if that trench in the woods is connected to one of these fake inspections, then she's also liable for illegal discharge. Patris opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. You're not going to believe this. We found a thumb drive hidden in the bottom of her desk drawer. Labeled board backup. She plugged it into a laptop. What loaded was a series of audio files, recordings of meetings, some official, some clearly taken without consent. One stood out, Sharon speaking on a call. If we reroute the overflow behind lot 73, no one will know. As long as the trucks don't come in, we can claim it's runoff from the last storm. I'll get my brother-in-law to move the pipe. Doug leaned back in his chair, stunned. She knew exactly what she was doing, I said. This wasn't incompetence. It was criminal planning. I forwarded the files to the district attorney's office through a secure portal. Between the falsified invoices, the environmental violations, and the wire fraud from fabricated vendors, Sharon wasn't just facing civil penalties anymore. This was felony territory. The next day, a state environmental response unit cordoned off the dumping site behind lot 73. Hazmat suits, testing kits, and a mobile lab were deployed. The local news showed up shortly after, filming as officials loaded contaminated soil samples into sealed barrels. A reporter with a mic approached me near the work zone. "Are you the contractor who halted services?" "That's right," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "And I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because when people in charge care more about appearances than safety, the only way to get attention is by letting the damage speak for itself." She nodded slowly. "And did it work?" I gestured behind me to the flashing lights, the camera crews, and the environmental techs hauling contaminated dirt. "What do you think?" The story hit the evening news like a thunderclap. HOA scandal in Oak Hollow, septic sabotage and environmental dumping uncovered. They aired the trench footage, the fake vendor invoices, and snippets from Sharon's audio files. Public outrage exploded. That weekend, the DA's office filed formal charges. 2 counts of environmental tampering, 4 counts of fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to falsify public records. Sharon was arrested at a country club brunch in front of half the city council. The image of her being led away in heels and a tennis visor ended up on the front page. But the cleanup wasn't over. I spent the next week working side by side with the new oversight subcommittee. We built a rotating inspection schedule, added transparency protocols for all vendor contracts, and installed a digital dashboard so residents could track real-time service logs. No more backdoor deals. No more hidden fund transfers. It wasn't just oversight, it was ownership. One morning, as I was inspecting a newly installed access riser behind a row of duplexes, a teenager on a bike rode past and shouted, "Thanks for saving our pipes, tank man." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Later that same day, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Oak Hollow, but from the State Board of Environmental Contractors. They had reviewed my conduct during the crisis and were issuing a commendation for decisive action under obstruction and duress. Apparently, someone in the DA's office had vouched for me. I pinned it on the wall in my office right next to the original Oak Hollow service contract. A reminder of how close things had come to the edge and how far we'd pulled it all back. At the next HOA meeting, Doug stood in front of the community and introduced a motion to amend the bylaws. It passed unanimously. From now on, no single person could authorize or block vendor access without full board consensus and resident notification. And just like that, the era of golf cart tyranny ended. People still talk about it every time someone new moves in. They'll say, "Make sure you pay attention to the bylaws. Last time someone tried to play queen of the neighborhood, the septic guy turned the whole place into a war zone." And I'll just nod, sipping my coffee from the back of the room, because some revolutions start with torches and pitchforks. And some with a blocked septic truck and a stubborn man holding a wrench. 2 weeks after Sharon's arrest, I was back at my desk, sorting through a stack of invoices when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Palmer," the voice said. "This is Detective Marcus Harlan with the Tarrant County Financial Crimes Division. I'd like to meet in person." "There's something you need to see." We met that afternoon at a small county field office, nothing flashy, just neutral walls, a coffee machine that hadn't worked in years, and a table that looked salvaged from a school auction. Harlan was mid-40s, clean-cut, sharp eyes. He slid a file across the table toward me. "We've been digging into Jennings' financials," he said. "Turns out the fake vendor scheme wasn't a one-off. There's a paper trail going back almost 6 years. I opened the file. It was dense bank statements, flagged transfers, hand-signed approvals. Most of it meant nothing to the average person. But I spotted the name right away, North Star Waste Solutions. She was funneling money even before she became president, I asked. Yup. As treasurer, she had just enough access to start laying the groundwork. Once she got into the top role, she scaled up. Fabricated inspections, backdated invoices, then moved funds into dummy accounts. Where'd the money go? Mostly to a property in Colorado, small town. She bought it under an LLC that tied back to the same P.O. box she used for North Star. I leaned back in the chair. So she was bleeding the HOA dry to buy land out of state. He nodded. Looks like she was planning to disappear once enough was in the pot. She just got greedy and sloppy. And the dumping site, Harlan's tone shifted. That's a separate matter. We're working with the state's Environmental Crimes Task Force. The volume of waste discharged, combined with the proximity to a protected wetland, elevates it. She's looking at felony charges under the Texas Water Code. I shook my head slowly. All because she didn't want to wait for a septic truck. He closed the file. People like her never think they'll get caught. They think rules are for everyone else. That night, I stopped by a community bonfire being held in the common field. Someone had dragged out a smoker. Kids were running around with marshmallows. It was the first time I'd seen Oak Hollow look like a neighborhood instead of a chessboard. Doug waved me over while Patris handed out plates. You hear the latest? Doug asked. The county's freezing the HOA's accounts until a forensic audit's complete. That includes Sharon's severance package. She tried to sneak one in the week before she was arrested. She put in a severance request, I said, taking a bite of brisket, for herself, $52,000, labeled as a departure bonus. I nearly choked. You can't make this up. I wish I was. Across the field, a group of residents had set up a folding table with a hand-painted sign, Oak Hollow Rebuild Committee. They weren't taking donations. They were passing out surveys asking residents what they wanted to see change, how they wanted their money spent, what repairs needed prioritizing. I walked over. A middle-aged woman with gardening gloves tucked in her belt loop smiled. We figured if we're going to clean house, might as well ask everyone what we want it to look like. I nodded toward the table. That's how it should have been from the start. She looked around. Too many of us figured someone else would handle it. That's how we ended up with roses instead of working plumbing. The following Friday, I was summoned to a deposition. Sharon's legal team was trying to challenge the reinstatement of my contract, claiming it had been coerced under duress. It was laughable. The hearing was held in a temporary county annex. I arrived with 4 binders, each labeled by category: contractual agreements, incident logs, video evidence, and financial correspondence. I didn't need to speak much. The documents did the heavy lifting. When Sharon's attorney tried to argue that the HOA had no choice but to seek alternatives, the judge cut in. You mean they had no choice after illegally blocking a licensed vendor, falsifying reports, and dumping untreated waste into a protected area? He turned to me. Mr. Palmer, is it true your company provided uninterrupted service for over 17 years before this incident? Yes, Your Honor. And you were never issued a formal termination notice? No, sir. The judge turned back. Motion denied. Contract stands. Outside the courthouse, I bumped into one of the newer residents, an ICU nurse named Liana. I remembered her because she'd called me the night her grandmother's basement flooded. She handed me a small envelope. Some of us chipped in. We know you lost money during the shutdown. I opened it, saw the check, and handed it right back. I appreciate it, I said. But what I really want is for you all to keep doing what you're doing. Pay attention, show up to the meetings. Don't let anyone run this place like their personal kingdom again. She nodded. We won't. By mid-month, the environmental cleanup was complete. The contaminated trench was excavated and sealed. Fines were levied, steep ones. The HOA was issued a temporary waiver from the cost, provided they submitted to ongoing compliance checks and quarterly audits for 2 years. As for Sharon, she pled guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd served time actual prison, not some country club facility. Her plea deal required her to forfeit the Colorado property and pay restitution to Oak Hollow. It wouldn't cover everything, but it was a start. Back at the office, I updated our client files. Oak Hollow's profile now had a new tab, Community Oversight Liaison. Doug and Patris had insisted on it. They wanted transparency from both sides, Ray knocked on the door. Got a call from the Brookside Development. They're asking about setting up a long-term service plan. Heard about what happened here. Tell them we'll meet next week, I said. And this time, we're putting the clause about unauthorized interference in bold, he laughed. Probably wise. That weekend, Oak Hollow held its first real community day. Not a board-run event, not an HOA fundraiser, just people showing up with folding chairs, food, and stories. I didn't plan to go, but Patris sent her son to drag me out. When I arrived, someone handed me a paper crown made from a septic permit form. It read, "The Throne Defender." I shook my head. "You people are ridiculous." Doug clapped me on the back. "You earned it." I stood there, looking out over the pond, one that wasn't filled with runoff anymore, and realized something had shifted. This place wasn't just repaired, it was reborn, and it all started because someone tried to block a septic truck. Funny how the smallest valve can hold back the biggest pressure until it doesn't.